Okay, are there questions?
Sir,
Yes, go ahead, please.
sir, I want to clear. Sir, you said that in a SU5 there is a 24 gauge bosons, and sir, in that 12 of these are responsible for CP violation at a high energy scale.
No, not CP
Yeah.
violation. They are responsible for baryon number violation.
Sorry, baryon asymmetry.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
In fact,
Okay.
X bosons, as we saw, give rise to baryon number violation. Right? X
Okay.
exchange can generate baryon number violation.
Okay. Yes, sir. Okay.
Any other question? Okay, so let me then begin. Okay, so let me first recall the issues that we encountered last time. So the issue is that in the standard model, baryon number is anomalous. So in particular, at low temperature, the baryon number is, the violation is very small, but at high temperature, baryon number is not conserved. Okay, and high temperature roughly means above the electric phase transition, so T of order 100 GeV. Now, this in principle could have given rise to baryon number violation just by standard model physics, if there is an out of equilibrium evolution of the universe. But what we saw is that the electric phase transition is second order. Is second order. So which means that the universe does not go out of equilibrium. One consequence of this is that there is no baryon number violation, number generation. But a more serious consequence is that any baryon number produced in the early universe will be wiped out. And we pointed out that one possible solution, only way out. Maybe I should go to the next slide. So only way out is that some exactly conserved quantities in the standard model was produced in the early universe. So this is necessary but not sufficient. But not necessary, not sufficient in general. And it is necessary because, as we saw, that if all the conserved quantities were zero, then in thermal equilibrium, all particle antiparticle asymmetry becomes zero, and hence there is no net baryon number. Okay, so at least it's clear that it's necessary that some of the N tilde, those conserved quantities, are non-zero. Okay, that means they must have been produced in the early universe. Okay. So with this in mind, we will now try to write down the conserved charges in the standard model. So the first one that I'll list is what is called B minus L. So this is baryon number minus lepton number. So L stands for lepton number. So baryon number we have already defined. Baryon number is 1/3 for all the quarks, minus 1/3 for the antiquarks, and 0 for everything else. So a lepton number, for example, is 1 for electron, neutrino, muon, neutrino, and then tau and tau neutrino. This is minus 1 for the antiparticles. And 0 for everything else. So it turns out that in the classical Lagrangian that describes the standard model, L is conserved, but L is also anomalous, but B minus L is not anomalous. Okay, so this is not anomalous, and hence it's actually conserved. The second set of conserved quantities that we have in the standard model, in the standard model, okay, this is not a statement about the nature because we know that now this is not conserved. So Li minus Lj, okay, where I and J can stand for the lepton families. Okay, so which means it could be E, mu, or tau. Okay. So again, the classical standard model Lagrangian has Li conserved for each of these, E, mu, and tau. Okay. But those are anomalous. Okay. But if you calculate the difference, Li minus Lg, that means Le minus L mu, those are free from anomalies. So let me just give an example. So Le minus L mu. Le minus L mu. Okay. So this will be 1 for E minus nu E, and it will be 1 for the antiparticles in the muon family, right? Because it's minus sign. So it's counting the difference between the electron lepton number minus muon lepton number. So mu plus and mu bar will have plus 1, and it will be minus 1 for E plus, mu bar, mu minus, and mu. Okay. Similarly, Le minus L tau. L mu minus L tau, of course, is just the difference. That's not an independent quantity. So there are two conserved quantities of this kind, right? Le minus L mu and Le minus L tau. And then we will also include the gauge charges. So recall the standard model gauge group is SU3 times SU2 times U1. And above the electroweak phase transition scale, because the Higgs vacuum expectation value is 0, these are the symmetry is unbroken and the charges are conserved. Now it turns out that the non-abelian charges are not really very relevant. Okay, for example, SU3, of course, will have conserved charges, but we just ignore it. Okay, and it will become clear later why we can do this, because first of all, these charges are not produced in any case, right? Because gauge symmetry is an exact symmetry, you cannot break it. Okay. And we'll see that the non-abelian part of the charges are not necessary. Okay, so for now we'll include this. Okay. So we'll include in particular. See, you cannot specify all the SU2 quantum number. I mean, SU2 has a non-abelian group, right? So it has 3 generators. Okay. So clearly, because they don't commute, you cannot specify all the 3 generators or the eigenvalues of all the 3 generators simultaneously. So it's conventional to work with what is called this I3 generator, which sits inside SU2. So this is basically sigma, the third Pauli matrix. So this is a half minus half generator for SU2. Okay. So for example, U has I3 equal to half, and D has I3 equal to minus half. Okay. That's because U and D sit in a doublet, SU2 doublet. Okay. They transform under the SU2 doublet representation. So that's what I3 is. That's a diagonal subgroup generator of SU2. Okay, we'll include it for now. And this is what is called the hypercharge Y, which is also conserved, okay, at high temperature. And a physical charge, okay, the electric charge, let me write that formula. Okay, all these you will probably learn either in the particle physics course or in quantum field theory, or perhaps in both. So Q is I3 minus Y. Okay, so the usual electric charge is the difference between the I3 quantum number and the Y charge, the hypercharge. Okay, so this is called the weak hypercharge. And all of these, okay, the n tilde corresponding to all of these is 0, because since these are gauge charges, okay, there is no violation of gauge symmetry, okay, even at high temperature, and hence you never produce these charges. Okay, so I'm including this I3 and Y, but it should be kept in mind that the corresponding L tildes are strictly 0. So the n tildes can be non-zero only for the first 3 charges. Okay, so these could be generated in principle because these are not gauge charges, and B minus L can be generated. Okay, are there questions?
So neutrino oscillations can change lepton number, right?
Yes, they can. That's why I said that these are not conserved in nature, but these are conserved in the standard model. And at this 100 GeV scale, you can ignore this fact that there is neutrino oscillation. This so later on, I mean, if we have some Li minus Lj that is produced in the early universe, right, then late in the history of the universe, right, where the time scale is of the order of the oscillation time scale, the Lis can get converted to Ljs. Okay, so these are not strictly conserved, but at 100 GeV scale, you can just think of these as conserved quantities.
Okay.
Any other question?
What is Y?
Y is the what is called the U1 quantum number. This is a U1 charge. Okay, this is what is called a weak hypercharge. And when you study standard model, you will see that the actual physical charge is this linear combination of I3 and Y.
What are, like, if we were to find particle-like states, what quantum number do they carry? Like, do they carry a Y quantum number?
Yes, they do. Okay, so for example, the U. Okay, let's look at U. I have already said U has I3 equal to half, right? So Y, you can see from this formula. So Y is I3 minus Q. So the Y charge of U quad will be half minus 2/3. That's minus 1/6. Because indeed, I mean, the particles do carry Y quantum number. So this is like, you think of QED, right? The electron carries some electric charge. It carries some U1 quantum number, right? So
Yeah.
this is so this part is exactly like QED. It's an abelian gauge field. Describe a single gauge field, and different particles coupled to this gauge fields, and the strength of the coupling is fixed by how much U1 charge they carry. So D, for example, D has its minus half, okay, and D charge of D is 1/3 plus 1/3. That's also minus 1/6. Which is not surprising because these are in the same SU2 doublet, right? So they better carry the same hypercharge.
Sir, there is a weak hypercharge. That means they carry only by weakly interacting particles.
That's, yeah, so we can, the Y is carried by weakly interacting particle, and U and D are weakly interacting, right?
Yes, sir.
They have strong interaction, but they also have weak interaction. In fact, most particles have weak interaction.
Yeah, okay.
So most particles carry the hypercharge.
Okay.
Is this clear? So the point is the hypercharge assignment of a particle can be read out if we know the I3, because then the electric charge you normally remember, right? So just take the I3 quantum number and subtract Y from there. Sorry, subtract Q from there. That sort will give the weak hypercharge of the corresponding particle. But when you write the electric charge, of course, in the standard model, electric charge comes out at the end. When you write down the Lagrangian, you specify what weak hypercharge the various fields carry, and based on that, you write down the couplings in the Lagrangian. Is this clear? Are there questions? Okay, so eventually we'll list the weak hypercharges of all the particles, okay, because we will need that. But we'll probably do this in the next lecture. Okay, today I'll set up the general formalism of how to calculate baryon number asymmetry based on this information. Okay, so here is the question that we'll be interested in asking. Given the conserved charges, n tilde L, how do we calculate the baryon number density? I should say conserved charge densities. Baryon number density, which I'll call NB. Okay. And here I'll carry out the analysis with a simplified assumption, okay, which is reasonably good approximation. So assumption that we'll be making is that the n tilde L by n gamma ratio is small, okay, which means that even if they are produced in the early universe, that these conserved charges, the amount of these conserved charges is small. Okay. And we'll later on justify this because basically the smallness of NB or tells us that n tilde L must have been small. Okay, we'll find a relationship between NB and n tilde L, and that will tell us that these would have been small. Okay, but in general, you expect that these are produced by some high energy processes, okay, and the amount of violation, okay, is small in the Lagrangian. Okay, and that's why this number is small. Okay, so now we have to proceed to do this calculation. Okay, that given n tilde L's, okay, how do we calculate NB? Okay, and as I said, we'll proceed with this assumption. Okay. Now, the way we are going to make use of this assumption is the following. Okay. So remember that we have that if all the n tilde L's are 0 for every L, then we had seen that the corresponding chemical potentials are also 0. This is the solution to the set of equations that we have. Okay. So this implies that if n tilde L is small, all the L tilde L's, not this one. If n tilde L's are small, then mu tilde L must be small. Okay, so we'll proceed with this assumption and then we'll verify that indeed the mu tilde L's are small. Okay, but we'll check self-consistency that mu tilde L's are small by showing that the mu tilde L's that we get this way are proportional to n tilde L. Okay, so smallness of n tilde L implies smallness of mu tilde L. Okay, so let me now write down some of the equations that were needed, and we had already written down these equations earlier. So remember that n tilde L we had taken to be given by a linear combination of the particle antiparticle asymmetries. Okay, so it's given by sum over alpha CL alpha n alpha minus n bar alpha. Okay, so this is the number density of alpha kind of particle. This is the number density of alpha kind of antiparticle. Okay. And this minus sign reflects that the particles and antiparticles always contribute oppositely to a conserved charge. Mu alpha was related to the independent parameters mu tilde L by this formula C L alpha mu tilde L, and mu, this is also equal to minus mu bar alpha. Okay. So mu alpha is given by this, mu bar alpha is given by minus of this. Okay. So that basically reflects the fact that the chemical potentials for particles and antiparticles are always opposite of each other. Then we had the formula for this is the statistical mechanics formula, okay, for n alpha in terms of mu alpha. So this was given by g alpha over 2 pi square. I think yesterday I missed the square. Okay, I had written this is g alpha over 2 pi, but the actual formula contains g alpha over 2 pi square. So it was something like 8 pi cubed to begin with, and then got multiplied by 4 pi. Remember? So this is k square dk. And here I'm going to write this in a slightly different way. Okay, it's the same expression that we had. E to the power square root of k square plus m alpha square minus mu alpha over t minus plus 1. So all I have done is that we had e to the minus of this, and then 1 minus e to the minus of this. I have just multiplied by e to the this up numerator and denominator. So the numerator become 1 and the denominator become this. And now I'm going to simplify this by assuming that this quantity, I'll assume that because you are working at high temperature, all particles you can regard as massless particles. Okay, particularly since you are working in the phase in which the standard model gauge group is unbroken, even the W and gauge Z bosons you think of as massless particles. And in any case, at high enough temperature, you can just ignore the mass term. So this can be replaced. Okay, this is not necessary. Okay, we can do the actual calculation, but I'll just replace it by k square dk over e to the power k minus mu by t, mu alpha by t minus 1, minus plus 1. And then the corresponding antiparticle n bar alpha is given by g alpha over 2 pi square integral 0 to infinity k square dk times 1 over e to the power k plus mu by t minus 1, minus plus 1. So using this, you are going to calculate n alpha minus n bar alpha, because that's what goes in here. So this is g alpha over 2 pi square integral 0 to infinity k square dk. So you can calculate the difference in the numerator. You see that the only difference is that here there is a minus mu alpha, here it's plus mu alpha. So let me write the denominator first. So denominator will be e to the k plus mu alpha over t minus plus 1 and e to the power k minus mu alpha by t minus plus 1. And the numerator will have e to the k by t will be outside. And then you have e to the mu alpha by t minus e to the minus mu alpha by t. That gives you 2 sine hyperbolic mu alpha by t. And now I'm going to use the fact that the mu alpha is small, and they are already, this is already of order mu alpha. Okay, so if you want to first order mu alpha, you can just set mu alpha equal to 0 in these. So this I'm going to write approximately as G alpha over, so I'll replace this also by 2 mu alpha by t. So G alpha over 2 pi square times 2 mu alpha by t integral 0 to infinity k square dk times e to the k by t over e to the k by t minus plus 1 whole square. Is this clear? Okay, so I just made that. So in going from here to here, I just made the approximation that mu alpha is small. Okay, so I'm going to write down this formula again in the next slide. So n alpha minus n bar alpha is G alpha over 2 pi square times 2 mu alpha over t integral 0 to infinity k square dk, and then e to the k by t over e to the k by t minus plus 1 whole square. So this one I can now make a change of variable. I write x equal to k by t. To write this as G alpha, okay, let me just get rid of the 2. G alpha over pi square times mu alpha over t. And then from this change of variable, okay, dk becomes t dx and k square is t square x square. So you get a factor of t cube. And here is integral 0 to infinity x square dx e to the x over e to the x minus plus 1 whole square. So this is an elementary integral. So let me just give the result for this. So this integral turns out to be, pi square by 3 for bosons and pi square by 6 for fermions. Okay, because for bosons, the denominator is smaller, so you expect larger value of the integral. That's pi square by 3. For fermions, it's pi square by 6. So I'll write this. So this pi square gets cancelled. The t and t cube gives a t square. So I'll write this as mu alpha g bar alpha t square. Let me put a mu alpha over 6, where g bar alpha is G alpha for fermions and 2G alpha for bosons. Okay, this is just a definition. You just have to keep in mind that this is the way you have defined G bar alpha. Is this clear? Okay, so let me write this again. So n alpha minus n bar alpha is 1/6 mu alpha G bar alpha t square. So now let me write this equation for n tilde L. So n tilde L, you remember, is sum over alpha C L alpha n alpha minus n bar alpha. So that is given by sum over alpha CL alpha, then 1/6 mu alpha G bar alpha t square. So this I'm going to write now as, let's say, 1/6 t square. I can take out the sum over alpha CL alpha G bar alpha. And for mu alpha, I'm going to substitute the result in terms of the mu tilde L's, because after all, our goal is to find the mu tilde L's in terms of n tilde L. Okay, once you have done that, you can calculate the mu alphas. So this equation you cannot solve because there are too many mu alphas, right? Because the number of particle species is typically larger than the number of conserved charges. So I'll write this as sum over k, Ck alpha mu tilde k. So this I'm going to write as 1/6 t square sum over k mlk mu tilde k, where mlk is defined as sum over alpha c n alpha ck alpha g bar alpha. And you can easily convince yourself that this is a positive definite matrix. Okay, so it's in fact invertible matrix. So because of this, we can write a solution to this mu tilde k as 6 over t square times sum over L m tilde. I think with these we had put inside this. M inverse KL n tilde. Is this clear so far? So this equation tells us how to solve for mu tilde k given n tilde. Okay. And this was of course derived assuming that mu tilde k is small. And we see now indeed that because of this linear relation, if n tilde L is small, then mu tilde k will be small, right? So the approximation is self-consistent. So now the idea is that we will take this mu tilde L, mu tilde k, use it to calculate mu alphas, okay, by using the same formula that we used here in the substitution. Okay, we'll use it to calculate mu alpha. Given the mu alpha, you can now calculate n alpha minus n bar alpha, okay, by using this equation. Okay. And once you have the n alpha minus n bar alpha for each particle species, we can calculate the baryon number asymmetry, because baryon number is also a linear combination of the n alpha minus n bar. So that's basically the principle of finding out how much baryon number is generated if there is a non-zero n tilde L to begin with. Are there questions? Okay. So let me write.
The n tilde L of our baryon number minus lepton number will come from observation, right?
Well, in principle, if you knew the high energy theory, you could calculate this, right? Because this should have been produced in the early universe. But the way we'll determine it, of course, that in the experimental we know NB, right? So once we can relate NB to n tilde L, we can reverse this and calculate n tilde in terms of NB, provided there's only one n tilde that is undetermined.
Okay.
Right? If there are multiple n tilde L's and if you have only one data, then of course you cannot determine n tilde L. But we will see that the situation is a little better, that we can actually, the relevant n tilde L we can determine just from knowledge of NB. But if you knew the fundamental theory, then you could calculate n tilde L from first principle.
Okay.
Okay. Any other question? Okay, so let me write this equation again. So mu alpha is 6 over t square. Sorry, mu, we calculated, what did we calculate? We calculated mu k, right? Mu k, yes. Mu k, 6 over t square, sum over L, m inverse KL, n tilde L. So from this we can calculate now mu alpha, which is sum over k, Ck alpha mu k, which is 6 over t square, sum over k and L, and it will be C k alpha M inverse k L n tilde L. Okay, all I have done is that I have just substituted this expression for mu k from here. So now this gives you now n alpha minus n bar alpha, okay, which was 1/6 t square g bar alpha times mu alpha, right? Okay, let's see that formula. This formula 1/6 mu alpha g bar alpha t square. So, yeah, g bar alpha mu alpha t square. So now we are going to substitute this mu alpha, and you can see that 1/6 t square cancels the 6 over t square. So what you are left with is g bar alpha mu alpha, and then sum over kl ck alpha m inverse kl.
Sir, in the first and the second line, shouldn't it be mu k tilde?
Yes, you are right. Thank you. This is mu k tilde. Did we do that here? Yeah, mu k tilde. Thank you. Okay. Any other question?
You have written a mu alpha extra in the last.
I have written a yes. Mu alpha is substituted, right? So now let's come to NB. So baryon number gets some contribution from each species, right? Or maybe not. Maybe leptons, of course, don't contribute to baryon number. Okay. So the general expression for baryon number is of this kind, right? B alpha times n alpha minus n bar alpha. Okay. So where B alpha is the baryon number of the alpha particle. And this minus sign simply reflects that the baryon number of the antiparticle is opposite. It's minus B alpha. So if you now substitute this, okay, we get sum over alpha and sum over k and L, B alpha, G bar alpha, C k alpha, M inverse KL, n tilde. Is that clear? So now I'm going to introduce a notation. So this quantity see, I'm just collecting all the alpha dependent quantities over here. So after you sum over alpha, okay, this quantity I'm just going to call Vk. Okay, I'll write down separated definition of Vk. So if you do that, then this becomes sum over K and L, Vk, M inverse KL, n tilde L. Where Vk, let me write down the definition here. So Vk is sum over alpha, B alpha, G bar alpha, Ck alpha. Are there questions?
Sir, what is VK physically?
Well, physically, okay, we'll see. I mean, it basically determines the component of the baryon number, okay, along these various conserved directions, roughly. But otherwise, it's just some quantity constructed out of the information about the theory.
Okay.
I mean, given a theory, right, given the standard model, you can calculate what Vk is. It's a fixed vector.
Okay. Okay, sir.
Right? For every k, you can calculate. Because Ck alphas are known, these are all known. So you can calculate this, and we will indeed calculate this eventually in the standard model.
Okay, sir.
Okay, any other question? Okay, so let me then collect all the formulae again, okay, and see what if you have got all the information. So we have the expression for the NB, which is sum over K and L, Vk, M inverse KL, n tilde L. The Vk definition, I'll write again, is sum over alpha, B alpha, Ck alpha, G bar alpha, MKL is sum over alpha, G bar alpha, Ck alpha, Cl alpha. And then we have the definition that NB was defined. The B alphas were defined this way, sum over alpha, B alpha, N alpha minus N bar alpha. And N tilde L was defined as sum over alpha, Cl alpha, N alpha minus N. Okay. So now let me again explain the various steps. So these relations, okay, so once you have the conserved charges, okay, you know which linear combinations of conserved charges, you can read out the Cl alphas, okay, in a given theory. Once you know what baryon number different species carry, right, you can read out the B alphas, okay, and this is what reflects that fact that the B alphas are the individual baryon numbers carried by the individual particle species. So once we have calculated this C and B, Cl alpha and B alpha, you can calculate MKL using this formula, and you can calculate Vk using this formula. And then this tells us how to calculate the net baryon number Xs if we knew the Xs of the conserved charge, okay, of each of the conserved charges. Is this clear?
Sir, finally, what all do we have to rely for, like, on experiment?
Well, the only information you have is NB. Okay, these are of course experimental, right? These are part of the theory, standard model. Okay, these will be just some integers, so these we certainly know. Okay. Otherwise, experimental you know only NB, right?
And N tilde L will come from some higher theory.
Yeah, N tilde L is supposed to come from higher theory. If you could calculate N tilde L from first principle using this higher theory, you can actually predict what NB should be and compare to the experiment.
And we are trying to do the reverse.
Yeah, we will basically have to do the reverse because you don't know what the higher theory is.
Okay.
Okay, but we will see that in that process we will gain some extra knowledge about our current theory, current universe. Okay, so at present, okay, let's think of it in the correct way, that we imagine that we have some higher theory which has given as N tilde L, okay, and regard this formula as giving the how to calculate NB. Okay. So in the ideal situation, we will calculate the N tilde L's from first principle, and then we will compare the prediction for NB with what is seen in experiment. But of course, physics doesn't progress in the idealized situation, right? So we'll have to go back and forth, right? I mean, when the experiments are ahead, we have to basically rely on experiments to put constraint on the theory. But you can see that this can be used to put constant on a theory. Suppose somebody writes down some extension of the standard model and proposes that as the model for baryon number generation. Now, once the microscopic theory is written down, once somebody has written down a microscopic Lagrangian, then in principle you can calculate N tilde by following the out of equilibrium physics, setting up the differential equations, which tells us how the N tilde evolve as a function of time. Okay, because N tilde will not be conserved in this art theory clearly, otherwise they would not be produced. So you can set up the differential equation, calculate N tilde, and once you have calculated N tilde, you can predict NB, and then you can see if that NB agrees with that proposed theory or not. Right? If it doesn't agree, that means that the theory that you have proposed is not the correct one. Because that's one way you can think of making use of this, right? To constrain what kind of extensions of the standard model you could possibly have. But any extension of the standard model which violates baryon number, we'll have to satisfy this constraint that the baryon number that is generated during this process should eventually agree with what you observe.
But like any other theory beyond the standard model could also have this as a free parameter, right? The charge, and
Yes, of
they
course.
might, yeah.
You could have, right? But I'm saying if somebody has proposed a particular theory, right? For some reason fixed all the free parameters, then you can predict NB. If there are free parameters, then you can say that the knowledge of NB will put bounds on the range of those free parameters.
Yeah.
Right? So that's the way we'll constrain your theory. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay, so now let's come back to our problem, right? So this is general. This is the here. I mean, NB could be any charge, any other quantity, right? And this could be any theory. But in standard model, okay, we saw that we have five independent charges. We have B minus L. Why? I'll order them in this particular way, okay, for reasons that will become clear soon. Then I have I3, and then I have LE minus L mu, and LE minus L tau. Okay. So this means that M is a 5 by 5 matrix. And V is a 5-dimensional vector. Okay. So we'll argue that M is block diagonal in the 2 by 2 block and then the rest. This is a 2 by 2 block. And that V has only the first two components 0. And Vk is non-zero only for k equal to B minus L and Y. Which basically means that instead of working with this 5 by 5 matrix, you can just look at the 2 by 2 block. The first 2 by 2 block, because that means that the N tilde, the only N tilde that will be relevant for determining NB are the NB minus L and NY, or N tilde B minus L and N tilde Y, and of which N tilde Y is 0 because it is a gauge charge. Okay, it cannot be generated. So then the only relevant quantity is N tilde B minus L. This N tilde LE minus L mu and N tilde LE minus L tau, if they are generated in the early universe, they will not be relevant for determining the B minus L. They will not be relevant for finding the NB, okay, because of this structure. But I'll try to explain this in more detail as we go along, okay, how this structure comes and what it eventually means. Okay. Are there questions? Okay, so let's start with the formula for MKL again. Okay, so MKL is sum over alpha, G bar alpha, CK alpha, CL alpha. Okay, it's obviously symmetric matrix, right? It's symmetric in K and L. So let's suppose that K stands for either B minus L or Y. Okay, K can be any of the 5, right? But let's say K is either stands for B minus L or Y. And let's further suppose that L is I3. Then I claim that for this, the following is true. So claim. Okay, and I'll indicate how it comes, but once you have the full standard model spectrum, you can easily verify this. The claim is that for every alpha, either CL alpha is 0. Okay, in that case, of course, it doesn't get contribution. Or there is an alpha prime, okay, a different alpha, such that CK alpha prime is CK alpha and CL alpha prime is minus CL alpha. That means for every alpha, you can find an alpha prime which has the same value of B minus L and Y, but opposite value of I3. Now, in this case, you can probably recognize what this alpha prime is, right? If alpha is the upper stands for the upper component of a representation, so suppose you have a doublet representation of SU2. Okay? If alpha stands for the upper component, alpha prime which is took as a lower component, okay, then that means that the corresponding C's will change, right? Because the lower component have opposite I3, so it contributes oppositely. But the B minus L and Y doesn't change. Okay? So, example, if alpha stands for U, we take alpha prime as D, okay, because U and D form this doublet. So this means that for I3, okay, it will contribute. So CL alpha, okay, let me remind you the definition of CL alpha. The definition is N tilde L, okay, when we express, it has this structure, CL alpha times N alpha minus N mod alpha, right? So physically what CL alpha does, tells us it's the nth conserved charge carried by the alpha H spaces, right? That's what CL alpha means. So in this context, okay, since alpha corresponds to I3, since L corresponds to I3, okay, it will CL alpha, okay, will correspond to the I3 charge of the alpha H spaces. So we want to reverse the I3 charge of the alpha H spaces, right? And the best way to do it is that you just choose the second member of the representation. Okay, if it's U, you choose D. If it's D, you choose U. Okay. So that reverses the I3 charge. Okay. But this doesn't change either the Y charge or the B minus L charge. Okay. U and D both have the same B and same L, and they have the same Y. Okay, because the gauge group is SU3 times SU2 times so U1, right? So SU2 and U1 quantum numbers don't interfere. Is this logic clear? So let me say its consequences, and then I'll ask this again. So this implies that MKL is 0 for such cases. If K stands for B minus L or Y, and L stands for I3, then MKL is identically 0. Are there questions?
Sir, please repeat the last MKL equals to 0.
Yeah, so if you look at this formula for MKL, right, there is a sum over alpha, And now I'm saying that the alphas are paired. Okay, given any alpha, there is an alpha prime for which this is the same, this is opposite. And G bar, of course, remains the same because if it's fermion, it remains a fermion. If it's boson, it remains a boson.
Okay, sir, I got
So
it.
there is a pairwise cancellation.
Okay, okay. Yes, sir.
Okay, that's why MKL is 0.
Yes, sir.
Is this clear? Are there other questions? Okay, so now we're going to repeat this for the other other charges. Okay, so again, let me write down the expression for MKL.
So is that why you didn't include SU3?
Pardon? Yeah, exactly. That's why we don't include SU3 or the
Okay.
octagonal, because the same argument will tell us that those will be also 0. Because for any gauge charge, it will be block diagonal. Any non-abelian gauge charges, because it's non-abelian gauge charges that can be paired, right? Here, the U and D are paired by not by the I3 but by I1 and I2, right? They are the ones which convert between U and D, and those commute the baryon number and the other charges. Okay, and that's why U and D carry the same values of the other charges except the hypercharge I3.
Yeah.
Any other question? Okay, so now again, let me write down the equation. G bar alpha, CK alpha, CL alpha. And let's again suppose that K is B minus L or Y, and L stands for this time LE minus LB. Then again, the following statement is true. Okay, I'll write down the expression for how CL is defined. N tilde L sum over alpha CL alpha N alpha minus N1. Okay. So let's suppose that this is the case. Okay, then for every alpha, either CL alpha equal to 0 or there is an alpha prime. Let me call this alpha double prime, because this is a different alpha way of getting to the pair, such that CK alpha, these are the same, and CK C L alpha double prime is equal to minus CL alpha. Okay. Now this again you can probably see by inspection. Basically what happens is that so in order that it is non-zero, okay, that CL alpha prime is not in order that CL alpha is non-zero, okay, alpha has to be either a lepton in the E family or in the mu family. Okay? Because anything outside, baryons, for example, carry 0 values of LE minus LB. Okay, the corresponding CL alpha will be 0. Okay? So the only particles that can contribute, that can give non-zero CL alpha, are either electrons or muons, or the electrons in the electron family or electrons in the muon family. So now, how do you go from alpha to alpha prime, alpha double prime? It's simply that if it's an electron family, you change it to muon family. And if it's a muon family, you change it to electron family. And because the charge that is considering is LE minus L mu, that will flip the charge. Okay, and hence that will flip CK alpha. So CK alpha double prime will be minus CK alpha. Sorry, CL alpha double prime will be minus CL alpha. L corresponds to the LE minus L mu charge, right? But this flip, okay, the flipping between electron and muon family, okay, neither flips the hypercharge nor the B minus L, because L is the total electron charge, right? So nothing is flipped. And if you flip it so that E goes to mu, okay, and new E goes to new mu, then Y remains the same. Okay, because the hypercharge assignment in the electron family and muon family are identical. So you flip, so E minus, so this flipping E minus will go to mu minus, E plus will flip with mu plus, nu E will flip with nu mu, and nu E bar will flip with nu mu bar. Okay, so these flips, so the main point is that these flips change the Le minus L mu. It changes the sign of Le minus L mu, but it doesn't change the sign of B minus L or Y. And this again means by the same logic that MKL is 0. Because these will cancel pairwise, right? The alpha contribution and the alpha double prime contribution will have opposite sign and they will cancel. And the same, okay, we can, I'll just write it here. Same argument holds for L equal to Le minus L tau. Okay, that's instead of mu1 you have tau. Are there questions? Okay. So the conclusion from here is that M is block diagonal. So the conclusion is that M is block diagonal. Okay, so if you parameter, if you draw it this way, B minus L Y, then I3 Le minus L mu and Le minus L tau, and similarly here B minus L Y I3 Le minus L mu Le minus L tau. Basically these entries are non-zero. Okay, you can think of the matrix. These are all 0. Okay, and here there is something. Here also there is a block diagonal structure, but you don't need it. Okay, there's some matrix here. Okay. But basically we will see that we will have to work on this block. Okay, but for that we have to also understand VK, which is what we are going to do next. Okay, say identical argument more or less. So let's look at the formula for VK. So VK is given by sum over alpha, G bar alpha, B alpha, C K alpha. Okay. And let me write again, N tilde K sum over alpha, C K alpha. Okay, I'm just writing so that you don't forget the definition of CK alpha. Okay, this is the charge, that the N tilde K charge that is carried by alpha species. Okay. So again, one can show that if K is I3, then for every alpha, either CK alpha is 0 or there is alpha prime. Okay, the same rule, in fact, in this case, there is alpha prime such that B alpha prime is equal to B alpha, B alpha prime equal to B alpha and CK alpha prime equal to minus CK. Okay. So you basically do the same flip, right? The upper component to lower component and vice versa. Okay, so U to D, D to U, and so on. Okay. So that changes the sign of CK alpha, but that doesn't flip the baryon charge. Okay, so baryon number remains the same. Okay. So this means that the corresponding VK is 0. Okay, because by pairwise sum, okay, they'll cancel. and Vk will be 0. And the same argument holds for, same reasoning holds for k equal to Le minus L mu or Le minus L tau. Which means that if I write Vk as a column vector, then its first two entries are non-zero, but the last three entries are 0. Is this clear? So you are now going to use this to say something about baryon number. So now let me remind you the expression for NB again. So NB was given by sum over K and L, Vk, M inverse KL, N tilde L. Okay. Now I should just remind you that if M is block diagonal, then so is M inverse, right? That means M inverse has the first 2 by 2 block, okay, the cross terms are all 0, and then there is 3 by 3 block, okay, which may have additional blocking, but you don't care at this stage. So because of the fact that Vk is non-zero only for k equal to b minus L and y, okay, so this is non-zero. For k equal to b minus L and y. That means here you only have to worry about k being b minus L and y. But then because it's block diagonal, that means this also must be b minus L or y. And N tilde L, of course, has this property that N tilde y is 0. So at the end, what we see is that NB should be given by sum over K, Vk, K, okay, so this sum over K will run over B minus L and Y, M inverse K. The second index can only be B minus L because N tilde Y is 0 and N tilde B minus L. Is this clear?
Why is N tilde y 0?
Because Y is a gauge charge, right?
Okay. Yeah.
You don't create it in the early universe because it is exactly constant. So the point is that the N tilde, so what we see from here is that N tilde Le minus L mu and L tilde Le minus L tau may be non-zero. Okay, because for example, in the early universe, right, some physics might have created only the tau leptons. Okay, in which case these will be non-zero. But if you have only created non-tau leptons, then also in B minus L is non-zero, right? Because L also gets contribution from tau lepton. And only that part will be relevant for determining NB. These parts are necessary if we want to calculate the difference between the muon and electron-lepton number, okay, in today's universe, or between electron and tau lepton numbers in today's universe, but not in calculating NB. Okay, so not that these are not important. Okay, these also tell us something about our universe. Okay. But NB is just related to N tilde B minus L. Okay, NB is not sensitive to these. So now let me give the result, and the actual derivation we'll do next time because it requires some adding and subtracting numbers. So the result in the standard model in SM, this is for 3 generations. Okay, that means we have the 3 generations of quarks and leptons. Okay, UD, CS, and TB. Okay, and then in the lepton sector, electron family, muon family, and tau family. Okay, there's 3 generations, 1 Higgs doublet. This is the minimal version of the standard model. What one finds, okay, this we'll try to verify also next time carefully. It's 28/79 times n tilde b. Okay, these numbers just add up, come from adding up the G's and the charges. B minus L. So from this we can also calculate NL, because NL is the total lepton number density. So NL is NB minus n tilde B minus L, right? Because this is this is giving the density difference between the baryon and lepton densities, which is exactly conserved in the standard model. And this is the baryon density. So if you take the difference, you'll get the lepton number density, okay, which is of course not conserved in the standard model, but this is the relic at the end. So this is then, well, you can calculate this. So minus, this gives you 79 minus 28, right? That's minus 51/79.
59.
Pardon?
59.
59. This 28,
49, sorry.
oh, it's 79 minus 28, no?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's 51. 51/79. Okay, anyway, I think we'll do this calculation next time. I may not be, these numbers may not be quite correct, but we'll do this calculation explicitly. Okay, but let me just give the principle. So NL gives you this, right? And so n tilde B minus L is determined in terms of NB, right? So NB is experimentally known, so you can determine n tilde B minus L. So this will be given by minus 51/28 times NB. Okay, so this is the total excess lepton. That's what we see. If it's generated from n tilde B minus L, then this should be the total excess lepton in terms of baryon number. Now the total excess electron you already know, right? That's the lepton you actually see. So Ne minus is basically the same as the number of protons, right? Number of protons in the universe, because of charge neutrality. That's Np. And that we had seen. So now the fraction of protons in Nb is about 0.87, right? Rest are neutrons. So the rest must be neutrinos, right? Because NL, out of NL, this Ne minus, this much is coming from the electron. So that means that the N mu, okay, this is, let me write it this way. This is, even though I have written it as Ne minus, this is strictly one should write it as Ne minus minus Ne plus. Okay, except that today the E plus number density is very low. Okay, so Ne minus is a good way of writing it. Okay. But this means that Nu minus Nu bar should be given by NL minus, NL is the excess lepton number, okay, lepton minus anti-lepton, so Ne minus minus Ne plus. So that will be minus 51/28 NB, and then minus this 0.7 NB, 0.87 NB. Okay, so it makes a precise prediction of how much excess neutrino we should have today in our universe. Okay, even though we can't see it, right? We can't even see thermal neutrinos. This is a much lower density than thermal neutrino, right? Because NB is like 10 to the minus 10 times N gamma. So we haven't even seen the thermal neutrinos, so clearly we are not going to see this. But at least in principle, we can see that it can predict the number of excess neutrinos. And it tells us that nu minus nu bar over n gamma is very small. It's still of the order of 10 to the minus 10. Okay. So the fact that we had ignored the chemical potential for the neutrino is justified. Okay. It's not the number of neutrinos, even though we have not seen it, the number of neutrino antineutrino asymmetry cannot be like of the order of n gamma. Okay, are there questions?
So NL number of leptons should have been positive, right? Because we associated positive charges, lepton charges to electrons and other.
Yes, so
I mean,
n minus is positive.
no, in the top equation, NL is minus 51 by 28 MB.
Yes. So this one came just by subtraction, right?
Yeah, but NB itself is positive, right?
NB is positive, yes, indeed.
So NL is negative.
Yeah, NL is negative, exactly.
And NL is positive for, I mean, lepton number is positive for electrons.
Electrons, exactly.
So it should be positive, right?
No, that's why it got subtracted. So it's actually negative, so the rest is compensated by neutrinos. See, the
Okay.
electron is giving positive contribution, right?
Yeah.
But the net contribution we see from here is negative.
Okay.
So that must be made up by the neutrinos.
That too anti-neutrinos.
Yeah. So basically, it's saying that there are more antineutrinos than neutrinos, and that number not only gives you this, but it also compensates for this. That's why you can say both are minus here, right?
Yeah.
You compensate for the electron, and then on top of that, you add this. But as I said, don't take these numbers too seriously. We'll do this calculation next time properly, and you see if these numbers are really correct or not. And the last thing I can say today is that, I mean, this gives you the net neutrinos, right? It doesn't say whether it's electron neutrino or tau neutrino or muon neutrino. If there is no neutrino oscillation, then it makes sense to ask that question, even though you cannot measure it really in today's experiment. So to get that information about how much of this is electron neutrino, how much of this is muon neutrino, and how much is tau neutrino, we have to basically rely on these numbers: n tilde Le minus L mu and L tilde n tilde Le minus L tau. So if you could calculate these from microscopic physics, okay, unfortunately NB doesn't tell us that. But if you could calculate this from microscopic physics, then we could use that together with this to actually predict how much electron neutrino excess you have, how much tau neutrino excess you have, and how much mu neutrino excess you have. But because we know today that neutrinos oscillate, right? The individual neutrino species numbers are not conserved. So lepton numbers in individual species is not conserved. Okay, so at a late time in the evolution of the universe, this information gets erased anyway, okay, because of the neutrino oscillation. So the only thing that really survives is this net neutrino excess, okay, because the neutrino oscillations, at least in one form, cannot change that number. But next time again we will discuss this, okay, and we will see that even that number can get changed. Okay, the total lepton number can actually get violated. Okay, are there questions?
Sir?
Yes, go ahead.
Sir, I just want to know, sir, at a high energy scale, is it necessary to consider only 3 generations of lepton or quarks?
Whether it's necessary to consider?
Only 3 generations of quarks and leptons.
No, it's not necessary.
At a high energy scale.
Yeah, it's possible that there are other higher generation of quarks, but those should have sufficiently large mass. Because we know that at low energy, that if you add more generations of quarks and leptons, they, first of all, you can rule them out from particle physics experiments, but also in cosmology that they change the Big Bang nucleosynthesis prediction, right? Because it will make the expansion of the universe fast. But in principle, at high energy, you could add more generations. Okay, you can assume that there are very massive families of quarks and leptons.
Okay. Okay, sir. But in matlab up
The
to
only issue is that
100.
because this now masses of the quarks and leptons comes to the because of the coupling through the Higgs, right? You don't add these masses as in the Lagrangian to begin with. So if you want to add very heavy,
Okay, up to 100 GeV, we can say there is only 3 generations, right?
pardon,
Up to 100 GeV.
yeah, and so the point is you need strong coupling of the Higgs, right? If you want to generate heavy quarks and leptons, and then the perturbation theory itself is not very reliable if you try to make the quarks and leptons very heavy. Right, because they come through the Higgs coupling, right? The masses of the quarks and leptons basically come from H psi bar psi kind of coupling, and the vacuum expectation value of the H is responsible for the masses. So the masses cannot be much larger than the vacuum expectation value of the Higgs, right? Then that otherwise it will require G to be of order 1.
Okay, sorry, sir, your voice become cut.
Sorry, what I was going to say is that if the masses of the quarks and leptons come from couplings of this kind, okay, that
Yes, sir.
the Yukawa couplings, and now, so that means that the masses are proportional to the coupling constant times the Higgs expectation value. So if you want to make the mass to be much larger than the Higgs expectation value, then the coupling constant itself has to become large. And that basically means that the perturbation theory is not valid anymore.
Okay, okay, sir.
So that's why we cannot really consider very heavy quarks and leptons, okay, which have masses larger than the standard model scale.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Any other question? Okay, so if not, I'll stop here and then we'll continue next time. Okay, so next time the first thing we'll do is to calculate this number from first principle, okay, from the various equations that you have written down. All it will need is to basically write down a table of all the particles in the standard model and what kind of charges they carry. Okay, and then you will just apply the formula directly.
So
Yes, go ahead, please.
regarding the higher theory that we are calling SU3 cross SU2 cross SU1, a higher theory than that.
Yes.
Something like SU5 you said was a candidate.
Yes.
But
But SU5, if you look at the particular decay that he considered, SU5 actually doesn't generate B minus L. B minus L is conserved in SU5. So SU5 is not good enough for this. So you remember the B minus L, okay, the decay that we found is D plus U goes to E plus U bar, right?
yeah.
So this has B 1/3, B 1/3, right? L0. So B minus L in this case is 2/3, right? So this one has, sorry, B minus L is 2/3, yeah. So this one has L equal to -1, right? So B minus L is 1 because we are subtracting L. And this one has B equal to -1/3, right? So B minus L is -1/3. So that's 1 minus 1/3 is 2/3. So this process conserves B minus L. It violates B, but it conserves B minus L. So SU5 is not good enough to produce this.
I was actually asking whether that theory would have much more fields than the standard model, right?
Yes, it would, in general.
So do those fields correspond to like do we postulate that they correspond to something physical particle, some sort of physical
They
particle?
correspond to some physical particle, but typically what happens is that the most of those fields, right, except the ones which are part of the standard model, they become heavy, right? So if you break that symmetry at 10 to the 16 GeV, then by various couplings, all those fields get mass of the order of 10 to the 16 GeV.
But are any of those like higher than spin 1 particles?
No, you don't add, you cannot write down consistent quantum field theories by adding higher than spin 1 particles.
Like even when we don't know much about the theory.
Pardon?
Like we don't know much about these theories, right?
Yeah. But if you want renormalizable theory, for example, right?
Yeah.
You cannot add higher than spin 1.
Yeah. Okay.
So this constraint is present only in Minkowski space, right?
Well, the ultraviolet behavior of the theory doesn't depend on whether you are working in Minkowski or space or expanding universe, because those are really short distance properties of the theory. Right? So
Okay.
if theory is not renormalizable, it's not renormalizable in all backgrounds. Right? It's that long distance properties that is sensitive to which space you are working in. Right? Minkowski space and cosmological space will have different long distance properties, but short distance properties are common.
Yeah.
So normally when you talk about grand unified theories, you still try to use the same ingredients, namely spin 1 particles and less, the particles of spin 1 and less, and you try to write down renormalizable quantum field theories. If you want to go beyond that, you have to embed the whole thing in string theory, right? And then that brings in a lot more new ingredients.
Okay.
But within these extended theories, we will see that there are ways to break B minus L, for example, right? We will write down explicitly a mechanism that breaks B minus L, and that in fact is also useful to explain the neutrino masses that we see today.
No, these series will also they will also couple to this phi field that generated this cosmological constant.
Yes, indeed.
Okay.
So ultimately, the cosmological constant is the result of the vacuum energies for all of these. So when you say that the cosmological constant is nearly zero, right, it's basically after you have added everything, it's nearly zero.
Yeah.
Any other question?
Sir,
Yes, go ahead, please.
sir, I have a question from last class. Why is second order phase transition an equilibrium process while first order phase transition is not?
Yeah, so it's basically the fact. I mean, one has to do a little more work to see this, but it's intuitively you can think of it this way: that if in the second order phase transition, what's happening is that the potential was like this. So the Higgs vacuum expectation value was at the origin, and as t goes to as t approaches Tc, what happens is that the quadratic term goes to 0, but the quartic terms still remain. Quartic and higher order terms still make the potential have a 0 here. So as t goes to Tc, the potential flattens out. So that the second derivative is 0. The higher derivatives are non-zero. And then as t goes below Tc, t less than Tc, the potential, the quadratic term becomes a little negative, okay, but then soon the quartic terms turn it over. So as t passes through Tc, t goes a little below Tc, it acquires a little vacuum expectation value. And then as t falls, the vacuum expectation value starts growing because the potential further dips. So what we see here is that with time, the vacuum expectation value was 0 here, 0 here. Here it became a small number and then it started growing. So vacuum expectation value of the Higgs field changes continuously. From 0 to non-zero value. So because this process is smooth, this is so this is what is called the second order phase transition. And because this process is smooth, the universe doesn't go out of equilibrium. Because there is a sudden change.
Whereas in the first order case, we have to tunnel, that is abrupt.
Yeah, in fact, not even, yeah, exactly. You have a tunnel, and that's a big change. Right? In the first order case, the potential, at the transition, right, what happens is the following. So you start with this, then the potential it develops a pair of minimum. I should draw the 0 here. And then at TC, the pair of minima come exactly at the same value. So this is at TC. And then as T becomes less than TC, so here what happens is this jump, it is a discontinuous jump, right? It was 0 before and suddenly it changes to a non-zero value, okay, by tunneling. So because of this discontinuous jump, okay, there is a sudden change in the universe. And that's what makes it go out of equilibrium. Okay, so this is first order transition. So sudden jump, it drives it out of equilibrium. So that is roughly the physics of why for second order phase transition the universe remains in equilibrium and for first order it goes out of equilibrium. Is that clear?
Yes, sir.
Okay, any other question?
Sir, in the first order, we can say there is a discontinuity in the value of H. Discontinuous change.
Yeah, there is a discontinuous change in the value of H.
Okay, okay.
It
Yes.
was here before and it suddenly become here.
Okay.
Okay, so then I'll stop now and then we'll continue next time.